what do you say to him?
I can't really say.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, you can, believe me. We've all said worse.
We'd all tell him to fuck off. I mean, my mum, when I was a kid, my mum got me a T-shirt that said "One race, a human race," and she said, "Go and stand on the corner, boy, and tell them, and go." Oh, it's terrible, but she said, "Stand on the corner, boy, and cut them off."
Do the mainstream media care about finding the truth? Do they care about following a code of conduct? Do they make sure that their actions are morally just, are truthful, honest? Or do they just care about finding a sensationalised story that gets your attention?
Breaking today, newly released Tommy Robinson has launched his strongest, most stringent attack on the British mainstream media as their attacks on him continue, this time via the working class actor Eddie Marsan on the fake news agents. Before we get to that, though, I've got to show you what is very much Tommy's biggest riposte yet to the mainstream British newspapers, notably the Daily Mail. He's, of course, involved in that harassment case involving their journalists, and also the Sun too. It's called press accusion, which I think is very clever. We'll analyse it with our superstar panel, Father Calvin Robinson and Alex Phillips, in just one moment. But first, watch this very strident new release.
Some of you may have read news stories from these sources today. The Sun, The Guardian, The Daily Mail. It's almost unavoidable. You may think the mainstream media are there to give you the truth. They don't care at all about the truth. They just want your attention, because the longer they have your attention, the more money they can make. Do the mainstream media care about finding the truth? Do they care about following a code of conduct? Do they make sure that their actions are morally just, are truthful, honest? Or do they just care about finding a sensationalised story that gets your attention? There's only one journalist in this room, John, and it's not you.
Described as homegrown extremists, they are self-radicalised.
It basically says a plan to help possibly kill Tommy Robinson.
We are in receipt of the following information which suggests your personal safety is now in danger.
Yeah. And ever bumps into Tommy, bro, just do him, bro, just do him.
The police have been contacting me to meet them because they need to give us Osmond warnings.
Cut your neck off and we'll EDO, bro. I'll grab your kids on the road.
So you can take photos and endanger my family?
No, it's not endangering your family.
Yes, it is.
Tommy Robinson, huh? You wanna fucking play girlfriend?
Tommy, I am gonna lynch your kids, mate.
Tommy Robinson, I got a message for you.
Bow!
Wow. Incredibly powerful stuff, Father Calvin Robinson. Upon his release from HMP Woodhill, Tommy Robinson said that he believed the mainstream media is the cancer destroying Britain, but the independent media is the cure. So do you think this is right for his first major campaign upon exiting prison to be taking on directly the mainstream media, specifically those big newspapers, including the Sun and the Daily Mail, by the way, which a lot of people might assume are on side because they are broadly considered to be right-wing papers?
Absolutely. There are no right-wing papers in the UK anymore. The Telegraph and the Times included. They're all left-wing rags at this point, or establishment rags. The problem is exactly as Tommy pointed out. They want your attention because the more of your attention they have, the more ad revenue they make. It's all about making money. It's a business stream. It's not about journalism anymore. There's no integrity. There's no honesty. There is no fact-finding. It's just sensational headlines, destroying lives, destroying the country for their own personal benefit. And it's a great shame. So absolutely, it's a good target for him to come out guns blazing to take down the mainstream media, because the benefits of the independent media are that people have so much choice, so they could tune in to the people that they trust to get the information from people that they know are doing the work behind it, and they don't have to listen to ITV, Channel 4. They don't have to pay the BBC for the privilege of doing so either. And all of this is changing the landscape, actually, because the mainstream media has been controlling the narrative of our country for a long time, and I think people have woken up to this, especially over COVID, when we weren't allowed to discuss where COVID came from. We weren't allowed to challenge the idea that these jabs might be harmful. We weren't allowed to discuss, well, if we need vitamin D and it's a benefit for our health, why are we not allowed outside for many hours of the day? All this stuff. We weren't allowed to have conversations. The mainstream media controlled the narrative for the government, and because they were paid lots of money from the government to do so. And so people woke up to finally realizing that they'd been manipulated for years. I was speaking to a friend of mine just before I came on air. She said, I've just watched Tommy Robinson's Oxford Union address from 10 years ago, and actually he was spot on in everything. But the media have been telling me for years that he's a far-right racist thug. And actually, if I was wrong about him, maybe I was wrong about EDL too, and I looked into EDL, and Tommy was burning Nazi flags. He was certainly not a fascist or a Nazi. Why did I believe he was? Indeed, why did you believe? Why did any of us believe any of these things? Because the media has been manipulating us from day one. They don't want us to listen to people who affect their narrative. They want to control it because controlling it controls us. Controlling us earns them all the money. And so we need to break down their entire industry. And it's on the way out anyway. Nobody watches television. Nobody listens to the radio. Nobody buys newspapers anymore. The demographic of people that do is so small, and anyone that tells you otherwise is lying, because the mainstream media is on the way out, and it's already been replaced by the independent media.
Yeah, and I think, Alex Phillips, one of the problems is that these newspapers have been part of painting Tommy Robinson as a monster without any type of nuance. And personally, I mean, remember, I've worked for both of those two newspapers that he's targeting, the Mail and the Sun, but I actually support what he's doing here. But first, the great thing about having you here on Outspoken is that you are awake to the massive problems with the mainstream media and the disturbing reality that it's impossible to trust the fact checkers who try and dictate the narrative. Now, given we love the news and want to stay informed but no longer believe so much of what the establishment gatekeepers tell us, it can leave us in quite a predicament, right? But I have the solution. It's called Ground News, and it's the best way to stay informed and cut through media bias and manipulative narratives so you can get the facts for yourself. I actually have it on my phone and in my bookmarks online because it's become so essential to my daily life. And you can see for yourself at ground.news/outspoken. But before I reveal an amazing discount for you today, let me show you this incredible website and app in action. So we're going to use the shocking story that I'm so passionate about, the incarceration of the UK's political prisoner, the grieving mother and housewife Lucy Connolly, who remains behind bars after one tweet and had her appeal rejected, sparking outrage across the world. So you can see clearly in one place that 37 sources are covering this story. Ground News instantly shows how the story is being covered by the media, broken down by whether it leans left or right, illustrated by its bias distribution chart. Then if you scroll down, you can see every headline about the story along with the political bias and ownership of the publication. Interestingly and promisingly, 32% of the sources in this case are independent. Now, the left-wing media covered the story predictably, with Wales Online flagging her racial hatred tweet and the Daily Mirror going full-on political propaganda with the headline, Tory councillor's wife jailed for sending set fires to hotel, loses appeal bid. But the coverage on the right-leaning outfits was actually far more accurate, with Guido Fawkes tapping into the horror of Starmer backing the 31-month sentence for one tweet, and the Daily Express saying her incarceration is a moral stain on British justice system. The Spectator said simply she is in prison because of her politics, while my friend Alison Pearson spoke to Lucy in prison for the Daily Telegraph. My favourite feature is the blind spot feed. That surfaces upwards of 20 stories daily that receive the majority of coverage from one side of the political spectrum. So if you love the news like I do, the blind spot feed is the best way to get a balanced perspective on what's happening. Go to ground.news/outspoken or scan the QR code on screen if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble to subscribe today. And check this out. Today, you will get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use for unlimited access. So that's ground.news/outspoken. But now, back to the show.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what sort of relationships there's been between successive governments and the editors of newspapers. We know that they meet up and have conversations. I don't know whether there's been any instruction that in order, I mean, it's like I was saying earlier with the riots, the televised riots, the curation of that process in order to try and make sure that there isn't insurrection, that there isn't a sort of a conflagration. And I don't know how much there's been conversations about that regarding the coverage of Tommy Robinson. You're both right as well when it comes to the media is reliant on making money. It's a business. You know, if you're a journalist or if you're a newspaper proprietor and you want your newspaper to keep being bought, you have to put in the material that people are going to want to read. And so unfortunately, market forces and capitalist forces do tend to end up dictating the stories in newspapers. And then after that, you have an editor's particular feel or want of the direction of travel of a newspaper, which can change. You know, typically the Sun, as you know well, Dan, often tries to back whoever they think is going to win the election, rather than say, we're always going to stick with this particular party. I've seen some interesting editorial shifts in newspapers, and there are newspapers out there producing, or journalists out there producing great content. You know, for instance, it was the Telegraph who carried Matt Goodwin's demographic research today. The Daily Mail often keeps us updated on crimes being committed by foreigners. You know, there is good stuff and good journalism out there, but it is an industry that is in decline. It is an industry that's suffering. It's an industry that has increasingly lost the trust of the public. And that is what is such a great pity, because the thing is, I'm a journalist, Dan, you're a journalist, Dan. It is a profession. And in the same way that you need people with expertise that you can have confidence in doing other jobs up and down the country, whether it's heart surgery or collecting your dustbins, I think it is important that there are journalists who are the honest, dependable gatekeepers of information and that bridge between what is going on in the world and the public. But I'm afraid a lot of the time that relationship has been abused in ways that Calvin was describing. I mean, what happened with press censorship around COVID, that I think is another example of where a government is likely to have sat down with a newspaper editor and said, right, this is what we need you to do. We know that happened with social media companies. And we later found out, of course, that, you know, when we were demonized for talking about the origins of COVID coming out of that virology lab, it was true. And the same thing when people were raising questions about vaccines, we were censored so much and bribed into taking them, when frankly, most of the population probably didn't require a vaccine and may have actually suffered as a consequence. So there have been things recently that have hugely damaged the relationship between what should be a free and independent and honest press and the public.
I think one of the issues, of course, is that the independent space is also being flooded with folk on the left who are absolutely establishment shills. Of course, the fake news agents are one of the worst offenders, Emily Maitlis and John Sopel. And I wanted to flag specifically this interview with the actor Eddie Marsan, who has taken on Tommy Robinson. I'll just get Stephen Wolfe to set it up, actually, because he posted on this. I get sick of elitist actors like Eddie Marsan who state the working class are thick and can't think for themselves. We are not manipulated and don't eat our flags. We just know that people like you can't abide our patriotism, our love of being English, our historic culture, and that we don't identify with the culture of Hollywood, who wrap themselves up in flags of decadence and selfish narcissism. Now, you're going to understand why Stephen Wolfe was so worked up when you see the disgusting way that Sopel and Maitlis react to the claims that Eddie Marsan makes here. Watch.
If you come from an immigrant community, you think long term.
Yeah.
You put more investment in education and learning, and the problem with the white.
But if you don't,
if you don't, the problem with, from my experience, and I can only speak from my experience of the white working class, is that we value identity, we value patriotism, we wrap ourselves in a flag, we value tribalism, and I think what that does is it allows you to be manipulated by people like Trump and Tommy Robinson, and they'll be walking down. I mean, these guys used to walk down Bethnal Green Road 3 times a year, and they were waving their flags, but it never improved their lives. You can't eat a flag. If you look now, you look at the education statistics now, but amongst the white working class as opposed to the children of immigrants, Chinese and African and Asian and black kids, they're outscoring them. Why are they outscoring them? Because they are the children of immigrants, and the immigrants value education. Yeah. What they do is they don't look at identity. They don't look at themselves as a fixed thing. They look at themselves as potential.
Yeah, what they could be.
What they could be. And we look at ourselves as, this is what I am and don't you dare change it. That's the problem.
That's fascinating.
It's absolutely fascinating.
But you responded to Tommy Robinson. I mean, you know, for all you said about not wanting to say the wrong thing on social media, you responded to one of
because
Tommy Robinson's tweets.
I literally grew up with people like Tommy Robinson walking down Bethnal Road 3 times a week, and if I'd go and get a bagel on a Sunday morning on Brick Lane, there'd be the National Front would be on the corner of Brick Lane every week. I grew up with this.
And what did you say to him?
I can't really say.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, you can, believe me. We've all said worse.
We'd all tell them to fuck off. I mean, my mum, when I was a kid, my mum got me a T-shirt that said "One race, a human race," and she said, "Go and stand on the corner, boy, and go." I was terrible, but she said, "Stand on the corner, boy, and cut them off."
Cackling like hyenas, of course, Father Calvin, and once again, looking down on us, we're all too stupid. That is fundamentally what he's saying.
The contempt they have for the ordinary working class British people. Is it John? What's the guy who was in the background just
John
laughing?
Sopel.
Oh, he said you can't eat flags. It's just horrible, isn't it? No, you can't eat flags, but you know what?
Hugh Edwards'
biggest
biggest supporter, John Sopel.
John Sopel, yeah. You can't eat flags, but you can't eat. And they can sit around saying, oh, these people they're manipulated by patriots because of this. Well, yes, they have an identity and they have a tribe and they love that identity and they love that tribe. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's the same from the other end of the spectrum too. These upper middle class people, but that put too much emphasis on education, are manipulated by academics and scientists. Again, we saw this throughout COVID when it was almost an idol made out of science. Follow the science, follow the science. And the scientists were there on pedestals, literally at lecterns, lecturing us, preaching at us, telling us how to live our lives, what we were allowed to do, how often we were allowed to breathe fresh air, when we were allowed to see our dying mothers, for goodness sake. And so to sit there and say, oh, it's the lower class people that are manipulated, we're all manipulated is the problem, but it's by who? I would much rather be around fellow patriots who love their country, who love their culture, who love their tribe that I am proud to be a part of, than around people who sit around sneering, looking down their noses at us. And this idea that we can be better, we're just, what was the word they used? A potential, that everyone has to improve. What if people are happy where they are? What if people are content? There's nothing wrong with being content. This capitalist idea that everyone needs to strive to be better somehow and that success is somehow having a better sports car or a bigger house, it's empty, it's superficial claptrap. Actually, the truth is the working class folks who grew up in the neighborhood that they still live in and that they die in, around their grandparents, their cousins, their aunties, their families together, growing up as a community, raising their children together as a community, they are the people who are much happier, much more fulfilled, much more content because they understand the true rewards.
Totally. Alex Phillips, what was your feeling watching that clip? Because to me, it was almost like, oh yeah, this is the working class guy we like. That's how they feel because he signs up to their ideology. Of course, he's a privileged actor. Sure, he's got an accent, but he's one of them.
Well, it's funny, he didn't start off with an accent during that interview and all of a sudden seemed to find it and become more working class the more he spoke about it. As if to sort of suggest his credential is still that person who grew up with Bethnal Green. But I am so fed up with this whole immigrants are like this, white people are like, no, people are people. You've got immigrants who work really hard and have kids who get a fantastic exam results, and you've got immigrants who do absolutely chaff all and sit there and have loads of babies and feed off the state. You've got white people who work really hard and go on to change the world with great innovations. You've got white people who do absolutely naff all, waste their lives and don't contribute anything to society. It isn't a them and us. There's all sorts of different people. And I hate the way that this game of immigrants are so wonderful. They should be beatified. That, you know, because they've come here making their new lives, aren't they? What, they're all so sacred. No, some are dreadful people. Some are murderers. Some are rapists. Some are terrorists. And in the same way that, you know, we have to be careful on our side, extolling all of our virtues about realizing there are dreadful people who walk among us as well. But, you know, it comes down to luxury ideology, fashionable viewpoints. And the thing is, if he was still a working class guy in Bethnal Green and hadn't become a successful actor with loads of money in the bank, and he was in Bethnal Green right now and going to Brick Lane right now, and he was the only white man there, he might think and feel a little bit differently to how he does given his station in life at present.
Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.